When Rossini came to Vienna in 1822, Beethoven was working on his 9th symphony. At that time in Vienna, there was a Rossini craze. Rossini, Rossini, everywhere. His Barber of Seville was a tremendous hit, like the Beatles in the 60s. His one great wish was to see the master, Beethoven, if only once. Years later, in 1856, he recalled his visit to Vienna. I'm now Rossini. During my sojourn to Vienna, I had myself introduced to him, to Beethoven, by old Carpari, but because of his bad ears and my bad German, conversazione was impossible, but I'm very happy that I saw him, finalmente. And Rossini, being Italian, loved to tell the story again and again, over and over again. I remember Beethoven very well, although it was molti anni fa, almost half a century ago, in Vienna. On my visit, I hastened to look him up. And he did not receive you, as Schindler and other biographers assure us. Oh, non è vero, non è vero. Al contrario, in the country, he received me at once and very politely. In fact, the visit did not last very long, for conversazione, a conversation with Beethoven was very difficult, difficile, painful. You know, his hearing was particularly bad on that day, and his Italian was very poor. But it was a tremendous, immense, great pleasure. And Rossini loved to tell the story over and over again until it finally grew into the famous Beethoven legend told by Rossini when he was about 70 to Richard Wagner, who was then about 47. This third version I don't want to keep from you. Oh, just remember, the first time he said conversation was impossible. The second time, conversation was painful and the visit very short. Now listen to the third, the authentic version. I'm now Rossini talking to Richard Wagner. When I mounted the stairs leading to the poor lodgings of the great man, I barely mastered un grande emozione, a great emotion. I knocked 3 times, no answer. I turned the handle. The door swung open, and I found myself staring into a sort of attic, terribly disordered and dirty. When I entered, at first he paid no attention to me, but remained bent over the piano and continued for some time to work on some corrections of a printed manuscript. Finally, he looked up and said rather abruptly in a broken Italian, barely comprehensive, Rossini, sei il compositore del Barbiere di Seviglia. Bravo, bravo, that is an excellent opera buffa. It will be played so long as Italian opera will exist, but never try your hand at anything but opera buffa. You would be doing violence to your destiny. The visit was short, as his hearing was particularly bad on that day, and in spite of my loudest shouting, he could not understand me, so I had to put it down in writing. I expressed my gratitude to him that he received me and my great admiration for his genius, for his true genius, and he answered with one sigh, one deep sigh, and exactly the words, un infelice, which means an unhappy one. After a pause, he asked me to give him details about the Italian opera houses, about famous singers, whether the operas of Mozart are performed there often or not, and so forth and so on. At this time, Wagner tried to interrupt Rossini because he really got carried away. But he couldn't stop him. He just continued. He wanted to get at least the last sentence of Beethoven. Write more like Barbiere. Write more like that wonderful Barbiere. And Rossini continued, when I descended those dilapidated stairs, I retained an impressione of this great man so painful that I could not repress my tears. Io pianto. I cried. That very evening, I attended a gala dinner at the palace of the Prince Metternich. Suddenly, I could not contain myself any longer. Without mincing words, I told those present what I thought of their conduct towards the greatest genius of the epoch, about whom they bothered so little and left in such distress. Their response was, that's what he wants. He's a misanthrope. He's cranky. He can't keep friends. But his deafness, does not that cause you pity? It would be very easy for you, by means of subscriptions for very small amounts, to place him for the rest of his life beyond real want. After dinner, there was a concert. On the program was one of the trios of Beethoven. Always he, everywhere, as it was said of Napoleon. The masterwork was listened to with religious respect. Hearing it in the midst of all those mundane magnificences, I could not help thinking sadly that perhaps at that very moment, the great man was creating in the isolation of his attic some work of deep inspiration, destined, like his previous one, to give pleasure to the same brilliant aristocracy who had excluded him. In this regard, Rossini was right. The same year, Beethoven was completing his Ninth Symphony.